Spade back here with you, High Noon Leather Works, for another leather adventure. And today we're going to start a new project, and we're doing a custom knife sheath for a custom made knife. My nephew just got into making custom handmade knives, and this one's Cerakoted. Looks real nice, and he wants me to make some leather sheaths for him. So we're going to start out with this one, and we're going to put a little twist on it and do a two-tone with one piece of top leather instead of sewing two pieces together. And then we're going to put a pattern on the inside of the stitching line on the front. So never tried this before, so it should be interesting. So come on in and let's get started. Here's the knife, and he made the blade. He Cerakoted the blade, made the wood handle. So he wants some custom made sheaths for him. So what I did was I took the knife, I made me a pattern so we can have a stitched belt loop back here for the knife, and I just made that pattern to where the knife would sit all the way, the handle would come all the way up to the loop. So from the end of the handle where the blade is all the way up to the top of the handle, I just doubled that in length, and that's what made it long enough that it'll stitch on the back. So that was one pattern I made. Then I just took the exact same layout, traced that off of that pattern, and then made a front. So that would be my front, this would be my back, like so. There's my belt loop. And then I don't know the terminology, I suppose, but I call it a shim. Like when I'm woodworking, I would call that a shim, where I put that between two pieces like that. And then what that'll do is that'll put a space between the front and the back, and I use the same thickness of leather that I used for the front and the back, and that'll allow that blade to go in and out smoothly. I've made some before that didn't have a shim, and depending on how thick the handle is, and this is a pretty thick handle, it makes it really tough to get that in there and out. And then the other thing is, if you don't put a shim in here, to where the knife, when the knife goes in, if it's rubbing up against anything, it'll rub up against that shim as it goes in and out. And that way, if you just had the front and the back pieces stitched together, when that knife is running in and out of there, you're actually rubbing up against your stitches. So eventually you may, if you use it a lot, you may actually end up cutting through those stitches. This way with a shim, the stitches are in the center of the shim, so the knife blade is actually touching the inside of the leather shim itself, so you're not going to cut through those stitches. So then I used my pattern that I made and took my three pieces, traced them out on a piece of leather, cut those out, so I ended up with the back piece, and that would be the one that will end up having the belt loop in it. I've got my front piece, and then I've got my shim, and I made this shim 5/16 of an inch wide. You can mess around with that and see whatever works for you. I like to make it wide enough that once I glue this together, then when I do my drilling or punching for my stitching holes, That way it doesn't move around. So if I put those three pieces together and just kind of hold those, then that gives me an idea of how my knife is going to fit in there. Just kind of a dry fit. And it looks pretty good. So it's not a huge blade. From the handle to the tip is 3 7/8 is the blade length. So it's fairly short sheath, but for the knife itself, I think it's going to work out really good. So let's take those three pieces. I did take the front and the back, and I beveled the edges just on the outside only. I left the inside square. I left both sides of the shim square, so that when I get these glued together and stitch them, I'll actually take a little bit of sandpaper and sand this down just a little bit all the way around until it's nice and perfectly smooth. Then I'll go ahead and do my burnishing on that, so it'll look more like one piece instead of three separate pieces. So then, after I beveled these two pieces on the outside only, then I went and took my grooving tool and made me a stitching groove 1/4 inch in. Now, I grooved all the way around the front and the back. And that stitching groove is not only going to be my stitching line, but that's also going to be where my design stops. So I'm actually going to put the design inside of this groove. And it's also going to be my two-tone line. So the inside here of the line will be a light brown. The outside of the line will be black. The back, the whole entire back part of the sheath will be black. And it'll be smooth on the back. It won't have a design. It's only going to be on the front. So the first thing I need to do is go ahead and take my moistening sponge. Let's go ahead and case this front piece that I'm going to stamp my design in. And again, you don't want to get it soaking wet. You just want to get it damp, get it moist. And let's move these pieces to the side. Same with my pattern pieces. Let's move those over here. And I'll grab my granite countertop piece so I could do my stamping. And I've been going back and forth as to what type of design I want to put on this. He didn't request anything. He said just do your thing and, you know, whatever. He didn't have a specific design or anything he wanted. So I decided to go with the two-tone dye, and then I'm either going to do the basket weave inside there, or I want to maybe do some scales. The only thing about doing some scales on this is I really need to make a custom scale tool to do this smaller stuff, because I normally use my rounded punches to do that, and I could still do that. This smallest one would probably work. By the way, this is, I didn't tell you, this is probably 9 to 10 ounce, 8 to 10 ounce leather. Or I could do the basket weave. So I'm thinking I'm going to do the basket weave on this one and see how it turns out. Again, I haven't done this before. This is not obviously a lot of leather. So if I make a mistake, I can use my pattern, cut out another piece, and start over. I'd rather not do that. But on my basket weave, I don't want to start straight across and make it look like I cut it out of a piece of leather that had already been stamped or something. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my ruler and I'm going to lay it at an angle. And it's not a specific angle, it's just an arbitrary angle. I'm going to take my stylus and I'm going to put a very, very light line, and I'm not sure you'll even be able to see that on camera. Let's see. Yeah, you can see that line that's at an angle there, but it's very light, and that's the line I'm going to go by to do my basket weaving. That way it looks more natural. It doesn't look symmetrical, straight across, straight down. Gives a little more character, I think. So what I have to do is stay within that line, obviously, of my grooving line. So it does, you kind of have to get very comfortable with the angle you're at. So I'm going to start there on the left hand side and go straight across. Now, when I get down here toward the end, you'll see I still have a little bit of area there that I have to get. And all I'll do is take my tool and tilt it at an angle. And just tap on it until I get the image to get to that line, or that groove line. Now I come back and I'm going to go to the top and I'll split the first two where they meet with my next line. The first line to me in basket weaving is always the toughest, because if it's messed up, then it's hard to move on from there. And then I'll just move up to the next line. And you can tell I'm changing the way I'm hitting on that, because I'm getting used to how hard I need to hit it to get the right depth, the right look. Now I'm going to turn this around because it's easier for me to see what I'm doing if I have the line that's already been started facing me. And once you get comfortable with the basket weave stamp, you can move fairly quickly. It's the end pieces that really, where you have to tilt it and then start tapping on it instead of giving it a good whack, so that you don't put your image outside of your groove line. Now, will you get some of that little ghosting look to it some outside that line? Yeah, maybe, but I really don't think it's that big a deal. Now, if you get a nice deep stamp mark in that groove, past that groove, then yeah, then you might want to start over or try something different. But I'm going to stop here and show you what I've got so far. And you can see I got a little tiny ghost area in a couple of places, but I think once I put the black dye out here, you won't even see that. So I'm gonna continue stamping this basket weave pattern in here, and then I'll be back. Alright, so I've got my basket weave inside of my stitching groove, and it turned out really nice. Now, these little ghost lines here that I was talking about earlier, where you just barely go outside of your stitching line, you can take your stamping tool while that's still cased, turn your stamping tool over to the round end, the part that you actually hit with your mallet, and go the thickness of that area from the grooved line to the outside, and you can push down on that and just, you kind of lightly press. And you can go both directions. You can go up and down. Now, I wouldn't go fast, I'd go real slow. And that will help get some of those ghost lines out of that area. Where you went over your stitching groove line. Easy for me to say. So you can see that just kind of flattens that out a little bit. You know, you're not pressing super hard, but what that'll do is that'll get rid of those little ghost lines around there. It makes it look really good. So it just kind of sharpens up, and if it depresses that just a little bit, all that's going to do is make the basket weave pop, because that would make the basket weave stand out more. So it's already, it feels 3D anyway, but if you go around and press on that with that smooth round part of your stamp, then that'll depress that outside of your stitching line just a little bit. Again, you don't want to press real hard, and that'll even give that more of a 3D look and feel. So we'll have to let that sit for a little bit before we do our dyeing on it. I think what I'll do is go ahead and start with the front here, and I'll just go ahead and take my stitching punches, and I'm using a 4 and a 2 prong punch, and what I'm going to do is I'm not even going to try to go all the way through. All I'm going to do is make a mark. I will probably end up drilling these, with a small drill bit on a drill press. And I've got some of those videos uploaded if you want to take a look at those, how I do that, because I may not actually show that in this series, because obviously this is going to turn out to be more than one video. Hopefully we can get this in 2 videos. And when I get to the curved side, I get down there where it's just too tight to use 4-prong, I'll switch to a 2-prong stitching punch. Can be a little tedious, but once you get in a groove of doing it, it's really not that big a deal. And I am doing that on a poly cutting board. I found that that does not dull my tools, my punches, my hole punches, my rounding punches, my stitching punches, and it does a nice job as a backer to give it a little bit of support, so that you're not trying to go into a soft surface underneath your leather. I'm going to go ahead and finish it out with this 2-prong punch. And what that does is that gives me a guide. You'll notice I didn't hit it hard enough to even go through the other side. But what that does is now that gives me a good pattern or guide around that edge to do my drilling when I get all these glued together for my stitching. So that part's finished. Now, since I'm doing the outside of this black and this part I'm doing light brown, I'm going to do my light brown first, then I can actually put my black dye over the top of that light brown. Some people may not like that or like to do that, but I've done that before and it seems to work pretty well. So let's try it and let's see what happens when I do that. Like I said, if I mess this up, yeah, I've got a little time in cutting out another piece of top leather and doing my stamping again, but I think it'll be fine. I'm going to, you could use a brush if you'd like. Had to switch batteries, my battery died. So you could use a brush, small brush for the black part on the outside if you'd like. I'm going to use this type of Q-tip. These seem to work pretty well. You could probably just use a regular Q-tip if you'd like. But that's for the black. So I'm going to do the light brown first. And let me find my light brown. There it is. Let me get a cup. And I'm going to have to move you for a second. I'll get a couple of trays. And then I'll move you back up. So this one's the light brown. It is fibings. I really like that. I've used some Tandy dyes and stuff, but I really like the fibings. It's very consistent, and it works great in my opinion. So I'll take a little bit of that light brown on my dauber. That's a wool dauber. And I'm gonna try to keep as much of that inside on the stamping, the basket weave, as much as possible, but I'm not going to be able to keep all of it from that outside. Like I said, the black's going to cover that anyway. And then all of the backside and the edges will be black. So I'm not concerned about that either. I just want to make sure that I get my basket weave stamping on the inside of that groove line really good and covered. And all I'm doing here is just kind of dabbing the excess off of the top so I can see if I have any of those grooves down in there in the stamping that it didn't get dye in. And that looks pretty good. So we're going to let that sit for a few minutes and let that dry before we go to the black on the outside, since that's all of the brown. That's the only thing that's going to be brown. So we're going to set that aside. We'll set that dye aside. Then we'll take our black everything else, the back and the shim, is going to be black. So I'll go ahead and put my black dye in the next container, and let's get another wool dauber here. And we'll get our other pieces up here. And we can go ahead and start dyeing those while that brown is drying. Now normally I don't handle these or do anything with them for overnight. I let them sit and dry overnight. And then I do my next, whatever it is, I'm going to handle them, stitch them. So I try not to handle them too quickly, but I'm going to try to let that light brown dry just a little while I'm doing this. Then I'm going to try to put the black on it so that I can, while it's still not 100% dry, that might help the black dye soak in outside of that stitching line. That's my theory anyway, because like I said, I have not tried this before. So it's a little experimental on my part. So I'm getting this edge real good, flip it over, do the unfinished side. Again, this is soaking this dye up really well. And this is just nice 8 to 10 ounce veg tan. You notice it's stamped really well, easy. Putting that Cerakote blade in here, it's not going to rust or corrode like it would if it was chrome tan. sure I get the back side of the shim. I want to make sure that everything's coated real nice. I don't have any raw leather showing. Remember, I want to soak these edges really good because I'm going to sand this down just a little bit. It's not like I can't go ahead and touch it up if I do go through the dye on the edges, but I want to make sure that I get them real good at this point. The back side's real nice. Now I can tell this is starting to change color a little bit. I'm going to go ahead and do the edge with my dauber, being very careful not to get any more than I absolutely have to on the front, because I want to do that with a Q-tip. Do the top edge here. The top edge it's just going to be the light brown. It's not going to have any black in it. So I just got to do the edge. Flip it over and do the back. So all of the inside is black. Alright, now I can I'm going to move the black pieces, the back and the shim, out of the way. I'm going to take my Q-tip, put it in the black dye, and I'm not going to get it soaking wet. And I'm going to start to the outside edge and see how it reacts, and work my way in toward my stitching line. So very carefully work my way into that stitching line. Don't let that get across that stitching line. Let me see how that looks. That's going to turn out really good. The lighter this brown turns, the better that's going to look. So probably won't be able to see that until the next part of the video, the second part. So I'll just continue around the edge. And by the way, like I said, I'm experimenting on this, but this Q-tip is doing an excellent job of controlling where that black dye is going. It's not allowing it to cross over that groove line, which is great. I can twist it, turn it as I'm applying my dye to keep it nice and even. It's keeping a nice line, and it seems to where I used the smooth end of the punch and flattened out those little ghost lines I was talking about earlier. It seems like that helped a lot as far as guiding, since it just lowered it just a hair. Helped a lot guiding this Q-tip right along that stitching line. So yeah, that's working really well. Start back up at the top on the other side again. I want to make sure I get it coated really well. And like I said, probably for not 24 hours, but overnight, I'll leave it. Won't mess with it again until at least overnight. And that light brown should lighten up a little bit. and you'll be able to tell, you'll be able to see the difference more than you can now. It's really hard to see the difference between the outside edge of the black and the light brown, because the light brown hasn't totally dried yet. So there's my coatings of my die, my stamping of my basket weave design inside of the groove line, and I've got all three pieces ready to put together now. There's part one of this custom knife sheath for the custom handmade knife. Come back next time and we'll show the conclusion of this. I'm going to make it a two-parter, so come back next week, check that video out. Thanks a lot for coming along. Thanks for watching. I appreciate it very much. And as I always say, please like, share, and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.